This is from the Associated Press earlier today. The president says the allegations of Russian meddling in the U.S. presidential election are, quote, fiction, invented by the Democrats in order to explain their loss. Now, would it surprise you to know that the president who said that is not Donald Trump? It's not. That's actually what Russian President Vladimir Putin said in an interview released earlier today. President Putin must be having a bit of a mind meld with the White House, because our own president, the aforementioned Donald Trump, said nearly the exact same thing this morning, tweeting, quote, Russian officials must be laughing at the U.S. and how a lame excuse for why the Dems lost the election has taken over the fake news. And while the Kremlin and the White House seem to be working off the same talking points, that's not the case when it comes to our long-standing allies. Following last week's NATO and G7 summits, German Chancellor Angela Merkel said that her country can no longer completely rely on allies like the United States. She said, quote, the times in which we could completely depend on others are, to a certain extent, over. And she's not the only German politician who feels that way. Chancellor Merkel's main political opponent in that country's upcoming election also blasted Donald Trump for his behavior during the NATO summit. Despite being in the thick of a heated election, he said, the chancellor represents all of us at summits like these, and I reject with outrage the way this man takes it upon himself to treat the head of our country's government. The level of trust between the two countries has gotten so bad that Germany does not want the U.S. intelligence help when it comes to monitoring their election. A senior U.S. intelligence official told NBC News that there isn't much trust in the Trump administration, especially when it comes to elections. Now, if you're hoping that maybe our country's relationship with our other European partners might prove a little more fruitful, well, think again. A senior EU official had this to say about the current American president's rapport with other European leaders, calling Donald Trump, quote, a new strange kid in the class nobody likes. And as for that very tense handshake between Donald Trump and the new French president, Emmanuel Macron, last week, the one described as a white-knuckled, clench-jawed battle of wills, well, it turns out that was no accident. President Macron told a French newspaper that, quote, one must show that we won't make little concessions, even symbolic ones. President Macron then went on to compare Trump to the likes of strongmen like Vladimir Putin and Tayyip Erdogan. Quote, Donald Trump, the president of Turkey or the president of Russia, are of a mindset of power relations, which doesn't bother me. I don't let anything go. That's how one makes oneself respected. Talk about a new world order. Wow. Well, joining us now is Ivo Daalder. He's a former U.S. ambassador to NATO, who is now president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. All right, Ambassador Daalder, thank you so much for being here. And first of all, let's start with the relationship with Germany. How much should the American people be concerned at what appears to be Germany's willingness to break, essentially, from the United States?
Well, it is concerning that the relationship between the United States and what really is our most important European ally, Germany, the strongest economy, the leader of the European Union, and a major player when it comes to our relations with Russia, that relationship is not as strong as it should be. I don't think it's breaking. I think Chancellor Merkel was making a point that she had another not such a great meeting with President Trump. Her first meeting in March wasn't very good. This meeting in both NATO and in Italy at the G7 summit was a problem. And she's making it clear that if it comes to the future of how we are going to make decisions, don't automatically assume that Germany will be following America's lead.
And, you know, there are a lot of Americans, particularly on the right, who have said Europe needed for a long time to stand up for itself, to do more for itself, to spend more on its own defense, and to not rely so much on the United States. It's part of what Donald Trump ran on. Is that something that Americans should welcome if Europe says, OK, fine, we'll take you up on that. Germany and France will lead, and we will put America to the side for now?
Well, yes, a stronger Europe is in everybody's interest. It's in our interest. It's in Europe's interest. And to the extent that Chancellor Merkel is now going to find ways to strengthen her relationship with France and the other EU countries and bolster their defenses, all of that is good. But only if it takes place within a larger context of a strong transatlantic relationship. It's not Europe or the transatlantic alliance. It really has to be Europe and the transatlantic alliance.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we encourage the Europeans to do is to do more, and to do more and be more capable but within the context of our commitment to NATO and their commitment to NATO.
And are you among those who thought that it was sort of catastrophic, really, and a huge error for Donald Trump not to explicitly endorse Article 5 when he was standing at that 9/11 memorial?
Yeah, I do, both because of the situation where he found himself, as you said, next to the 9/11 memorial, which, after all, was the 9/11 attacks, was the first and only time that NATO invoked Article 5, the collective defense provision of the NATO treaty, but also because during the campaign he had said things about NATO. He called it obsolete and not necessary anymore. So there was this expectation, I think, on the part of his aides, as well as everybody else, that he would come to NATO headquarters, embrace the alliance, recommit America to Article 5, as every one of his predecessors since Harry Truman has done, and move on from there. That's not what he did, and it was deeply disappointing.
There are all these headlines that talk about Donald Trump as sort of the kid in class no one likes, the sort of bully in school that no one wants to talk to, that you have to be nice to in front of the teacher, but that he's really not liked. There was the whole golf cart ride while everyone else was walking. And he definitely, it feels like the United States president is much more isolated from our former allies. And then you've got this interesting story. There's an article that came out while we were on the air from the Associated Press, and here's how it reads. It says, President Donald Trump has been handing out his cell phone number to world leaders and urging them to call him directly, an unusual invitation that breaks diplomatic protocol and is raising concerns about the security and secrecy of the U.S. Commander-in-Chief's communications. And according to this report, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has already taken advantage of the offer. What do you make of this report?
Well, I think it in some sense conveys the idea that the president does want to have a strong personal rapport with other leaders, and by exchanging cell phone numbers, he's trying to say, I really would like to have a relationship where we can talk to each other whenever you want to. And that's a good thing. The bad thing, of course, is that our cell phone communications are hardly secure. Anybody in the intelligence community will be able to listen in. And equally importantly, the reason we have not only secure communications, but more regular communications, is that so people can take notes and we know what kind of promises the president will have made so we can act upon it. If no one is listening in, if it's just a call between two guys or a guy and a gal, and no one is really paying any attention to what is being said, then diplomacy will become more difficult to pursue, and agreements that whatever is reached on the telephone may not be acted upon. So secure communication, very important. Making sure that everybody knows what the president says and acts upon it, equally important.
Yeah, and and one wonders whether you can create better relationships on the phone that you weren't able to do in person when you had the opportunity. So that is an interesting tack. Ivo Daalder.
Well, that's certainly true.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thank you. And up next, we have a bizarre story involving Ivanka Trump's business interests, one that you are going to want to stick a pin in. That, plus the rollback of civil rights efforts under President Donald Trump. Are former members of the Obama administration worried about the path that we're headed down? We will ask one straight ahead.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.